Now it's time for Q&A. Dr. Yvette Meercook, EDD, from Boise State University's College of Education, will be answering questions about her presentation, STEM Drives Progress, Practical Approaches on Integrating STEM to Address IEP Goals. Dr. Showen Yang is the moderator.
What a lovely presentation, Yvette. So, Yvette, I have some questions for you. So when we talk about IEP, many people probably only think about fine motor, gross motor, or families will only think about language, pre-academic skills. So I was wondering how can we address the connections between STEM learning and other developmental areas with families? Do you have any strategy that you used? And can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Well, parents are always really concerned with their children's IEP goals and how those are going to be addressed in the context of their educational setting. And we really emphasize, as partners with them, the role of the school-to-home connection as well. So especially now with distance, so many people in distance learning, we're really emphasizing everyday experiences and how those tie into STEM learning and how those tie into their child's IEP goals. So, for example, I have parents do sensory walks with their children. So lots of families are going out for walks right now together and having children pick up different items that they see and then taking them home, and how can they use them? Do they put them in water? Do they put them and hide them in their bean pit? And then I show parents how when children are really interested in what they're doing, they're going to do more things like commenting. So oftentimes with the children that I work with, one of the expressive language goals is that they comment on things, and that helping parents see how they can narrate that to, it feels bumpy. And then I feel like this context as well helps families learn the importance of free exploration for young children. And this is true for young children with and without disabilities. It's just oftentimes parents of children with disabilities have so many things that they have to do and so many instructional practices that they have to put in place and schedules to keep, that I ask them to schedule some exploration time really based on what their child likes to do. And we see a lot of engagement, and we see the child from multiple perspectives, but from my particular perspective, a sensory perspective, really sort of relax and really be able to explore their environment. And that's the perfect time when their bodies are regulated, where you can try to work on some of this reciprocal social interaction, this expressive language that is usually so much of a part of a child's IEP.
Okay, thank you, Yvette. That's a really great answer. And then we also have questions from the participant, and I think it's about having the topics and materials. Like, do you model how to use the materials, or just let them explore and see what happens? Like the sink and flow, I think she's talking about the video, like how did the kids know how when to put the phone on the boat? So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So in terms of the materials to explore, we had them all laid out for children. And then we also encourage children to walk around the classroom and walk around the outdoor time and grab materials to experiment with. And this lasted an entire center time. So we'd have different materials on different tables to encourage children to try different things. And then they just put it in the water, and they were commenting to each other, does it stay up? Does it drop down? I'm doing a similar activity with students that I work with over distance learning this week, and I asked parents to just have your child have a variety of items, and I gave suggestions of what I was going to bring to our STEM time. And I had students bring a variety of items. One child brought a pencil, which I don't know why, I just didn't think about bringing a pencil. And so he showed us that, it floated. And so then I pulled out my popsicle stick and I asked, what do you think this is going to do? Do you think this will sink or float? And I put it in my bin, and it floated. And then the child who brought the pencil was like, it floated because it's wood. And this is a child who's had a really difficult time engaging with the computer and engaging over distance learning. And it was just so amazing to hear him not just comment, but make the connections that, oh, a pencil's made of wood, a popsicle stick is made of wood, that's why it's going to float. And I felt like that was such a great example. And Mom was so surprised. And it really did help him then connect with his other peers. And to, he actually asked one of his peers, what did he bring?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Yvette. And we also have another question. The participants talking about, I love using STEM activities to build connection and social emotional skills, and also motor, executive function, and problem solving. But one of the things that he or she is struggling with is explaining the importance of STEM and integrating it throughout the early childhood program and having developmentally appropriate activities to help with the IEP goals to colleagues who do not understand early childhood development and education. So my students, parents tend to grasp the idea and run with them, but therapists and administration do not get it. What advice do you have for addressing this?
Well, I think that especially if you're trying to discuss the effectiveness with administrators, using your data and using observations and documentation. So really looking at a child's IEP goals and comparing it to, when they're engaged in a STEM investigation, how does their engagement and participation differ? How much prompting, and so taking the specific data that you would do normally, but you're comparing two different contexts, and how much prompting does that child need to transition, to engage, to maybe interact with a peer or with an adult, and compare that to maybe some other center activities that not necessarily aren't preferred, but don't allow for that freedom of exploration. So the video clip of the young girl who was, doing her raft investigation, this was a child who would not reference peers. And you see her looking at her classmate and go, look what I did, right? And so I think because she was really engrossed and really interested in the activity, we were able to see some of those things come out. And again, pictures, video, if you're able to have the consent to do that, really also show people how powerful this could be. And so I think kind of using that data of progress monitoring, typically people will see what you mean when you're doing that.
Okay. Thank you, Yvette. So in the presentation, you talk about putting the words on the wall idea. So can you tell us a little bit more, what kind of STEM words that did you use, and did you have any resource about that, or did you use any visual to help with children's learning? Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
So one of the aspects of our STEM investigations was to really look at that scientific vocabulary. And, children who maybe have issues with articulation and with expressive language may not be able to say these words, but by us being able to expose them to it, they're understanding the concepts. And so what we did is that we did put the actual word on the word wall, and then what we would do is we would talk about it as a group, and we would show examples of what that meant. So compare or experiment were a lot of the words that we kept sort of showing. We did use icons for some of those concepts, and we tried to put some of those icons around the room, or for children who needed a communication board, either on an iPad or on a PEX binder that they have, we would try to have some of these words there. And we try to vary nouns as well as verbs, because we know that children need exposure to both types of language, both the verbs and the nouns.
Okay, thank you. So when you talk about using the example to explain about the meaning of compare, can you tell us a little bit more, like, are you modeling or are you using a real life item to show what's compare? So can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. So I'm not saying to children, oh, let's compare these two things. But I'm showing them and I'm asking that open-ended question of, what do you think is going to happen if we put, this object? So yesterday we were using big cotton balls and little cotton balls. And I said, what do you think is going to happen if we have this one and this one? And how are these different? And some children are able to articulate that. Some children, what we would do is I put both cotton balls in the water and I would just narrate and describe, wow, the big one is soaking up water faster than the little one. And so I would describe it that way. And then I'll ask parents to continue with that exploration, maybe do that again and show them, or use a soft object versus a hard object. So comparing the properties. So we don't necessarily just use the language. We use physical modeling. We use actual demonstrations. And then we ask parents to follow up with it as well.
Okay, thank you. So you also talk about, like, right now you also work with students in a distance learning environment, right? So can you tell us a little bit more, like, how do you support and facilitate STEM learning in a remote learning environment? I think that there's a lot of participants want to know about this, especially in this pandemic. So if you can share some of your experience or strategy to encourage STEM learning in a virtual environment, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so we use sort of a 3-step approach when we're setting up an investigation through this distance learning, because we really do need parents to have the materials and help their children gather the materials for our investigation. So number one, I'll put out a little video showing parents, hey, this is what we're going to do in our group this next week. And I always try to give it to them by either Thursday or Friday, so they have a weekend to, gather up these materials. And then I give them links to books to preview just some of the concepts of what we're going to be talking about. So a few weeks ago, we did an investigation around wind. And so I gave them a couple of stories that use wind as one of the main features of the story, as well as a nonfiction book about wind. Because what I realize is that children do really like to look at the pictures, to think about it. I show parents how you could use read alouds, because our libraries here have very limited hours and you can't just go in and get a book. You really have to plan weeks in advance. So I try to find things that also have a read aloud attached, and I'll show parents over this video how to pause the video and maybe point out different things to the child, and then just let them have access to that for a few days. So that's we do a lot of front loading that way. And then during the group, I'll encourage families to come and participate. And if the child is just observing, because I do have some families who they'll log into the group, but they don't have any materials. And I say, that's fine. And I try to engage the child with, what does so-and-so have? Or what did Billy bring for our for our wind? Like, how do you think that's going to make this ball move? So I will engage children who don't have the material still in thinking and looking at what's happening. And then I always have my materials out so that I'm able to also model and show the children what they're doing. Because some families will put the video on and then they'll walk away. So I'm just left with the child. So I always make sure I have my own materials. So even if they're not doing it, they engage in it. And then I always send a follow-up video, because undoubtedly I've learned from the children themselves. So like the pencil. And so I said to parents, if you're in bath time, have a pen and a pencil and see what happens, right? So allow them to sort of take what we did in group and infuse it into an everyday routine.
Thank you. So we have a question from a participant. I think she's wondering if any coding, programming, or robotic activities are also incorporated in your STEM program. So can you tell us a little bit more about this? Thank you.
Yeah, so I with this group in distance learning right now, we haven't yet gotten to coding or to a robotics yet. For a couple of different reasons, but a lot of it is we're trying to focus on tools that parents would have at home that we can incorporate. So we haven't used that yet, but in part of our STEM project that we did at Boise State with the funding from the Idaho STEM Action Center, we did do a robotics unit with a preschool classroom. And it didn't have the proportion of children with disabilities as other classrooms did at Boise State Children's Center, but we were able to do that. And we really came up with, at the time we were using this robotics program, we were asking children about, Chinese New Year and the Lunar New Year. And so we were able to sort of create a dance by using the robot, and the children created the dragon, and they also created the dance moves, and we were able to program it using simple coding blocks, so a screen-free coding robotic system. So we have done that. I haven't done that with my current students.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I was kind of like, when you were talking, I was kind of picturing, how it would look like.
Well, and even with that investigation, we tied it to a story as well, so that we're able to, we tied it to calendar time, we tied it to a story. We used gross motor movements of moving forward and back and turning around, which both are gross motor, but as an OT, you also have to plan your motions, so there's motor planning. And then there's also quite a bit of language because of those directional vocabulary words of forward, back, around. So we did use that, but that was something that robotics program was quite expensive, and it's something that I would love to implement when we're back face to face, and maybe have my parents sort of support us by reading the books, and maybe we can check out the robot to different families.
Yeah, I love the example. Yeah, I can't wait to see like when the time is allowed that we can go back to face to face, and you showed us more example and wonderful videos. So in the presentation, you also talk about writing IEP goals by connecting STEM. So, and you also showed us like a wonderful table of the IEP goal monitoring progress. So can you tell us a little bit more about this and give us some examples or your experience in connecting IEP goals with STEM?
Yeah, so I actually feel like STEM investigations, no matter what the topic is, just lend themselves well to targeting various different goals that we see in a child's IEPs, from expressive language to receptive language to social emotional development. Now, that said, it doesn't mean that just having children explore and create or investigate or explore a phenomenon is going to be enough. Those instructional supports still need to be there. And just like with any activity that you would do with a child, if you're trying to create peer-to-peer interaction and to foster those friendships, we've noticed that you do need teachers to intentionally set up the environment to create that collaboration, asking a child, well, look at what Johnny did. What do you think? What would happen if you incorporated some of those materials in your creation? And why don't you go ask Johnny what? So you do have to facilitate some of those goals that you're working towards. But setting up an investigation in this way that gives children this freedom within a structure of a STEM investigation definitely lends itself to working on these goals in a much more robust way. And again, as an occupational therapist, there's so much fine motor planning, sensory experiences that children are doing, and they have a meaning to the child. So like I can do a center where we're doing Play-Doh and doing different shapes and cutting it with scissors, but I'm creating, or I have my goals in mind. The children don't really know how this connects to what they want to do. So STEM investigations allow you to capitalize on those interests and have children actually engage in something that has meaning to them. And because you're able to do things in different ways, you'll get a little bit of a window as to how they're thinking about things.
Okay. Thank you. And we know, like in the presentation, you talk about STEM as a vehicle to drive the progress of the IEP goals, right? So I was wondering, during your experience in working in the STEM program and connecting STEM with IEP, what other challenges do you face when you're trying to connect STEM with the IEP goals, and then how you solve these challenges, solve these issues?
So the challenges, when we were working in the inclusive preschool classroom, all of our children who had IEPs also attended a developmental preschool. And so the challenge was to, as one of the questions sort of alluded to as well, is to get these types of investigations infused into other parts of their educational world. So crossing contexts was a little bit difficult. We were very fortunate that we had a strong parent communication piece, and We Engineer certainly has like parent resources, and they, recommend you have a STEM bag, and you give that, you share that across the different families. We were lucky enough to be funded by Idaho STEM Action Center that we were able to, for every investigation, send home a STEM bag. So we had a strong parent to child communication. I'm finding the work I'm doing currently with families, it's hard because everybody has different time constraints, different schedules, and different materials and access to materials in order to really cut across what we're doing in our group to the home environment. So that is, I think, one of the most difficult things, is to have children really be able to do this in different aspects of their days and different aspects of their lives. And it's not just something that's an OT group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is wonderful. Thank you, Yvette. So I guess another questions I have is about, so a lot of people, not many people will probably think when children are doing STEM activities, sometimes it will cause their frustrations or challenging behavior. So have you had any experience about that, and how you address this?
Well, that was something that I have to admit, when we were embedding the engineering design process in our inclusive preschool classroom, that's one of the things that before we implemented it, we were very nervous about, because we had a number of children who would become frustrated if things didn't go right. And what was really interesting is that all the children really saw things not working. We don't like to use the word failure, but those failures as just part of the process. So, okay, so I created something, it didn't work, so now I have to improve upon it. And the little girl that you saw who was improving upon her, that was really surprising, that that's how she reacted to her raft just sinking. Because prior to that, if something didn't work out, or she was a little bit scared to try something new, she would just not participate. So just having that talk, that is part of the process, really was surprisingly powerful, that students do just see those types of, when things don't work, I have to improve upon it, as part of the process. And we didn't see those frustrations. I think that what I like to do in my groups is I like to model when something doesn't work. And I'll be honest, sometimes I'm like, I know this isn't going to work, but I'm going to model it so they can see, and I can model that reaction. But then sometimes things actually surprise me that they don't work. And so we get to say, wow, I'm really surprised that didn't work. What could we do to make, we were doing a little boat with tinfoil, and it sunk. And I'm very surprised, like, what could we do? Maybe I should, and I would compare and what another child did, where they did the walls much higher. And so I'll, say, well, I'm going to make mine high like that, and I'm going to try it again. So I model to them, if something doesn't work, how can we improve upon it and then make it work? So I think that that's a real critical piece of it. And I do think that had we sort of allowed our fears of, oh my gosh, if something fails, they're not going to be able to handle it, we wouldn't have seen like how children really do just see these improvements as part of the natural process of designing something to solve a problem.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like adults' intentionality and the intentional teaching to support those social emotional skills are really important as well. I guess our time is running off. So thank you, Yvette. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And I hope the participants enjoy the rest of the STEMIEFest. We still have a STEMIEFest tomorrow. So feel free to come back, and thank you so much.
And I do want to just, before people go, I do want to just say that a video about how we did the robotics is one of all those videos and resources are on the slides that were attached to this presentation. So definitely you'll get more information and see how we structured that as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yvette.